It was a beautiful spring day, just the kind of day for daydreams. And daydreaming was exactly what a little girl named Alice was doing as she sat on the riverbank with her older sister. Alice would have liked to play a game or talk or make believe, but her sister was quietly reading a book and really didn't want to be bothered. Finally, Alice couldn't keep silent any longer.
You know, I really do wish you'd tell me. Just what good is a book without any pictures? Looks so dull. I mean, it really does.
Her sister looked up from her book and said to Alice,
"You'll understand soon enough when you grow up."
Look, I'm already 7.5. I think that's quite grown up. And I really do wish you'd stop talking to me as though I was a child.
But you are still a child, Alice. You can't really think that you're a grown-up.
Yes, I do. Almost. I mean, just how on earth am I supposed to know when I'm grown up or not? Would you mind telling me that?
Well, for one thing, you have to be much taller to be grown up. And you won't cry as much. You are a bit of a crybaby.
I am not. I don't cry much at all. Hardly ever.
Well, when you've grown up, you'll cry much less than you do now. And one of the best ways to know if you've grown up is when Mother asks you to join the rest of the grown-ups for tea.
With that, Alice began dancing around her sister, spinning like a top. After a few minutes, though, she got so dizzy that she fell down on the soft grass. All of a sudden, a very strange sight appeared before Alice. A very large white rabbit with big pink eyes and wearing a waistcoat ran across the field in front of her. Alice called out,
"Oh, Mr. Rabbit! Mr. Rabbit!"
But the rabbit didn't stop. He continued dashing across the field, exclaiming,
oh dear, I shall be too late."
Completely forgetting about her sister, Alice jumped up and chased after the rabbit. When he disappeared into a rabbit hole, Alice jumped in right behind. Down, down, down she fell. As she was falling, Alice saw strange and frightening things. At last, Alice landed safely, only to see the rabbit hopping off in the distance.
"Oh, Mr. Rabbit!"
She tried to follow him, but as she turned a corner, the rabbit had vanished.
Mr. Rabbit!
Alice stopped and looked around.
How am I ever gonna get home?
She asked herself. Then Alice spotted a small golden key that fit the tiny lock on a little door which led to a beautiful garden. But Alice realized she was much too large to fit through that door. Suddenly, she noticed a little bottle marked, "Drink me." Alice picked up the bottle and took a sip, then another. As she drank, she got smaller and smaller until finally she was just the right size to fit through the door. Up and down and up, Alice had grown to 9 feet tall and shrunk to several inches tall from eating this and drinking that. Finally, when she was quite small, she fell into a giant pool full of the tears that she had shed when she was gigantic.
Oh, now I've fallen into the sea. But this isn't the sea. These are my tears when I was 9 feet tall. Oh, I wish I hadn't cried so much. I should be punished for it now, for being drowned in my own tears.
Suddenly, a large and lanky lory bird came crashing into the water, followed by a dodo bird. They were certainly the strangest birds Alice had ever seen. Next, a cute little mouse splashed into the pool beside Alice. Since she was so tiny, she asked herself,
"What is that? Mouse? Do you know the way out?"
But the mouse didn't pay any attention to Alice, and he started swimming away. Alice swam after him while the lory bird and dodo bird thrashed about wildly in the water, trying to keep up with them. Alice called after the mouse,
"Mouse, don't you understand English? Are you French? Oui, ma chatte. That means, where's my cat, you know?"
When Alice realized that she had frightened the mouse, she quickly added,
"Oh, I beg your pardon. I quite forgot you don't like cats."
Our family has always hated cats. Nasty, low, vulgar things. Don't ever let me hear that name again.
Demanded the mouse angrily.
I won't, I promise.
Replied Alice. Alice didn't wish to anger the mouse any further, so she decided to change the subject.
Are you fond of dogs?
Asked Alice.
There's a nice old terrier who kills all the rats.
The mouse began to shriek and shiver. Poor Alice had frightened him once more.
I'm sorry. I won't mention mouse catchers again.
Said Alice. Alice and the mouse swam to shore. When they arrived, the dodo bird and the lory bird had caught up with them. The lory bird offered some advice on how they could all dry off. It was suggested that they have a caucus race. Now, Alice had never heard of a caucus race, so she asked the lory bird to explain. Feeling a bit too waterlogged to give a lengthy explanation, the lory bird decided to show her. With a wide swoop of his wings and a loud screech, the race was on. What a commotion that race was! Birds going up and down, creatures of all sorts and sizes joining in, running, jumping, and clawing in all directions. There was screeching and yelping and guffawing, and then the dodo bird announced it was all over. The creatures stopped at his command. Everyone was celebrating, everyone was dry, everyone was having a wonderful time. All of the wild celebrating left Alice very tired. The mouse was tired too, and decided that he should leave. As he was halfway down the road, he laughingly called over his shoulder that cats don't only eat mice, but birds too. Hearing this, the lory bird and the dodo bird panicked. The lory bird screamed. The dodo bird screeched. Just hearing about a cat was enough to frighten away the dodo bird and the lory bird. But Alice was not alone. She looked around and spotted a huge blue caterpillar sitting with its arms folded on top of a mushroom. The caterpillar was smoking a hookah pipe and coughing as he asked Alice,
Who are you?
I hardly know, sir. I knew who I was when I got up this morning, but I keep changing sizes, and I'm afraid I'll never find my way home again.
Explain yourself.
said the puzzled caterpillar.
I can't, sir, because I'm not myself, you see.
No, I don't see.
Snapped the caterpillar.
Well, being so many sizes in one day is very confusing to a little girl. You caterpillar? Where are you? Why, he's disappeared.
Alice then started walking along a path. After a while, it led her to a small house. The door was open, so Alice walked in. There, sitting on a stool, was the Duchess, feeding a baby. The Duchess reminded Alice of a dressed-up hippopotamus. Sitting beside her was a cat with the strangest smile Alice had ever seen. The Duchess told Alice that if she had anything to say it to the Cheshire Cat. Turning to the cat, Alice said,
Excuse me, Cheshire Cat. Would you tell me, please, which way I ought to go from here?
The Cheshire Cat grinned and replied,
That depends a good deal on where you want to get to.
Home. I need to get home.
cried Alice.
There must be a way home, and I'll find it.
Where are you going?
That way.
The cat pointed in 2 directions and explained,
Well, in that direction, there's a hatter. And in that direction, there's a March hare. Visit either you like. They're both mad.
But I don't want to visit mad people.
protested Alice.
Well, you can't help that. We're all mad here. I mean, I'm mad. You're mad. We're all mad. Meow, baby.
The cat's eerie grin and devilish laugh scared Alice out of her wits, and she ran out of the house and into the woods. She ran and ran until she reached a clearing in the woods. In the middle of the clearing was the March Hare's house. In front of the house, under a large tree, a tea party for 3 was ready to begin. The 3 were the March Hare himself, the Mad Hatter, certainly a mad-looking creature, and a dormouse sitting in between them, fast asleep. Alice thought to herself.
Goody, I'm just in time for a tea party.
But as Alice approached the table, the March Hare and Mad Hatter shouted out,
No room! No room! No room!
There's plenty of room!
cried Alice. The March Hare decided to be a bit more friendly and invited Alice to join them.
Would you like some wine?
Alice looked over the table, then said,
I don't think I should drink wine. I'm too young.
Good. There isn't any anyway.
Then it wasn't very nice of you to offer it.
And it wasn't very nice of you to sit down without being invited.
But these crazy creatures continued to tease poor Alice until she couldn't stand it any longer. Finally, the March Hare said,
Now, how would you like to tell us a story?
I'm afraid I don't know one.
admitted Alice.
Then the Dormouse shall.
The Dormouse will.
Screamed the Hare and the Hatter.
Wake up!
Shouted the March Hare.
Stop it!
Cried Alice.
It doesn't matter if anyone tells us the story or not.
I want a fresh cup.
The Dormouse lifted his head.
I am a Dormouse.
He hadn't been asleep after all and heard every word they said. Alice urged him to tell a story. Slowly he began his story. The story was about 3 sisters who drew all manner of things that started with the letter M. When Alice asked why they did that, she was interrupted by the March Hare and insulted by the Hatter. Alice's feelings were hurt. She turned and ran away. As she was running, she was thinking that when she got home, her mother would see how much she'd grown up and invite her to a real tea party. Alice walked on through a forest and soon came upon a beautiful garden with colossal sunflowers and great white roses. As she stood gazing at the garden, Alice heard sounds of a parade approaching. When it came into view, it was the strangest parade she had ever seen. It was a parade of playing cards. There were card soldiers, card courtiers, card children, and even a card king and card queen of hearts. As the queen passed, she spotted Alice and asked,
Who is this? What is your name, child?
My name is Alice. May it please your majesty.
Off with her head.
roared the queen,
Nonsense!
replied Alice indignantly. The king pleaded with the queen.
Come now, dear, she's only a child.
The queen suddenly changed the subject.
Can you play croquet?
She asked Alice.
Why, yes, your majesty.
She answered, then followed the queen onto the grass to play the strangest game of croquet imaginable. The balls of the croquet set were live hedgehogs, and the mallets with which to hit the balls were flamingos. Alice had a terrible time trying to hold her flamingo in her arms as she played. As the game was being played, the Cheshire Cat suddenly appeared and started to talk to Alice. Seeing this, the queen demanded,
And who is exactly the owner of this monster? Ugh, off with his head, whoever or whatever it is.
I think it belongs to the Duchess, your majesty. Perhaps you better ask her about it.
replied Alice.
Fetch the Duchess here and be quick about it.
Ordered the queen. Alice thought to herself,
They're dreadfully fond of beheading people here. Wouldn't you say? The great wonder is, anyone left here at the head at all?
when the Duchess arrived, she exclaimed to Alice,
Well, as I live and breathe, and I hope to keep it up, if it isn't a little one. How are you, my dear?
The queen leaped in between Alice and the Duchess bowed and said,
Well, if it isn't Her Majesty.
The queen roared,
Well, it is. And that being the case, would you be good enough to grovel? Right here on the gravel. Now, I give you a choice. Either you or your head must be off, and at once.
Do you think I'm ready for groveling?
said the Duchess, and in an instant she made her choice and ran off. The queen turned to Alice and asked,
Have you met the mock turtle yet?
I don't even know what a mock turtle is.
replied Alice.
Why, it's the thing mock turtle soup is made from. Oh, you must meet him. Now, you just follow that path and you'll see him.
Alice thought the queen was leading her to the mock turtle, but instead she left her face to face with a griffin, a fierce-looking monster with the head of an eagle and the body of a lion.
Are you a mock turtle?
Asked Alice.
A mock turtle? Do I look like a mock turtle? Can't you tell a genuine griffin when you see one?
Snapped the griffin.
I'll take you to the Mock Turtle. Come on.
Everybody says come on. I never was to order around before in all my life. Never.
Stormed Alice as the Griffin led her down a path to the Mock Turtle. A very sad-looking turtle indeed. The Griffin pointed to the Mock Turtle and said to Alice,
Guess what his sorrow is?
Why, he must want to go home.
Said Alice. Then, turning to the Mock Turtle, she continued,
I know why I'm so sad, Mr. Mock Turtle. I want to go home. I just seem to be getting further and further away. But why are you crying?
The Griffin answered instead,
It's all his morbid imagination. He really has no sorrow.
Oh, shut up, Griffin.
Snapped the Mock Turtle, and Alice gently asked,
So what is the matter, Mr. Mock Turtle?
Oh, my dear.
The turtle began his story.
Once I was a real turtle. We went to school in the sea. My teacher was an old turtle. We used to call him Tortoise.
But why did you call him Tortoise if he was really a turtle?
We called him Tortoise because he taught us. Really, you are very dull. We had the best of education, reeling and writhing, and then the different branches of arithmetic, ambition, distraction, uglification, and derision.
Oh, shut up, Mock Turtle.
Snapped the Griffin.
Enough about your lessons.
Then, turning to Alice, he said,
Now, tell us about your adventures.
Alice sighed and said,
Well, I would tell you my adventures beginning from this morning. It's no use going back to yesterday, because I was a different person then.
Alice's story was suddenly interrupted by voices in the distance.
The trial's beginning! The trial's beginning!
Come on, come on.
Shouted the Griffin, grabbing Alice's hand. Together, they rushed through the woods to a garden where the king and queen were holding court. All the creatures of this wonderland were gathered there. The White Rabbit, now acting as the court herald, called out,
Silence in the court! Herald, read the accusation.
ordered the king. The White Rabbit held up a scroll and read,
The Queen of Hearts, she made some tarts, all on a summer day. The Knave of Hearts, he stole some tarts and took them quite away.
With that, the king commanded the jury,
Consider your verdict.
Oh, no, Your Majesty, not yet, not yet. There's a lot more to come.
protested the White Rabbit.
Call the first witness.
Call the first witness!
In the midst of this whirlwind, the Mad Hatter walked in, holding a teacup in one hand and a piece of bread in the other. He approached the king and said,
Oh, I beg your pardon, Your Majesty. I was just finishing my tea when they dragged me in here.
Give your evidence or I'll have you executed on the spot.
bellowed the king.
Oh, Your Honor, I'm a very poor man.
Began the Mad Hatter.
You're a very poor speaker. If that's all you know about the case, you may stand down.
Stand down, Your Majesty. But I can hardly get any lower. I'm on the floor as it is.
Exclaimed the Mad Hatter from the ground.
Well, then simply go.
The queen agreed. Almost.
Of course. And just take his head off outside.
Call the next witness.
As the next witness entered, the crowd began to sneeze.
Give your evidence.
Ordered the king.
No, I won't.
Insisted the cook.
What are tarts made of?
Demanded the king.
Pepper! Lots of pepper!
Alice was getting a little bored with the strange trial, and she said to the Griffin seated beside her.
You haven't gotten the evidence yet.
As she spoke, Alice began to get bigger and bigger. A guinea pig, sitting beside them, called out,
You're growing, young lady.
But I didn't eat a piece of mushroom or drink anything.
Well, there's no doubt about it. You're growing up.
exclaimed the Griffin. The king was becoming annoyed by the noise in the courtroom and by the distraction Alice was causing. He commanded,
Rule 42. All persons over a mile high are to leave the court.
I'm not a mile high.
pleaded Alice.
Yes, you are.
Snapped the king.
I most certainly am not.
Nearly 2 miles high.
Argued the queen.
Oh, off with her head! Off with her head!
Alice now realized she was quite large. Larger, in fact, than anyone there. She mustered up all her courage and said,
I'm not afraid of you. You're nothing but a pack of cards.
This made the cards very angry, and they all began to attack Alice. They came from all directions, kicking at her feet. They came at her in the air like missiles, dive-bombing right at her. Alice felt as if she was caught in a whirlwind. The next moment, the strangest thing happened. The cards began to turn into leaves and float harmlessly to the ground. Alice suddenly found herself back on the riverbank. She was normal size again. Did this mean she was going home? Alice ran from the riverbank toward her house. Oh, how good it was to be back home.
Mother, Father, I'm back!
Shouted Alice. She looked around, but didn't see anyone. She ran toward the mirror on the mantelpiece and peered into it. There were her mother and father, but on the other side of the mirror.
Mother! Father! Anybody!
Cried Alice. Alice tried slipping through the mirror. She tried crashing into it, but it was no use. She couldn't get through it. Just then, Alice spotted a strange old book on the floor. It was one she had never seen before. She picked it up, sat down on a chair, and started to read. But to her amazement, everything in the book was backwards.
Jabberwocky. 'Twas brillig and the slithy toes, to gyre and gimble in the wabe. How mimsy were the Borgoves, and the mome roused out grape. Beware the Jabberwock, my son, the jaws that bite, and the claws that catch. Beware the Jubjub bird, and shun the frumious Bandersnatch. I can just tell this is supposed to be a scary poem. It's a good thing I'm grown up, or I probably would be a little frightened.
The Jabberwocky suddenly appeared in the room from out of nowhere. It was the most terrifying creature Alice had ever imagined. Breathing fire from its mouth and flapping its hideous wings, it roared at Alice. Alice screamed and covered her eyes. When she opened them again, the Jabberwocky was gone. Everything was silent. Alice looked around the room. She was completely alone. Suddenly, she heard a quiet voice that seemed to come from a picture on the wall. It was a picture of an owl.
I can tell you about your monster,
said the owl. Alice got up and walked towards the owl. She asked the owl,
What happened to that monster? Not that I'd want to meet him again.
Nothing happened to him. That monster was the thing you created in your own mind.
My mind most certainly did not create anything like that. I was simply reading a silly book.
Your fears gave birth to it.
The owl interrupted Alice.
And until you overcome those fears, little girl.
My name's Alice, Mr. Owl.
As long as you have those fears inside you, Alice, the Jabberwocky may come for you at any time.
Well, I suppose there are some fears inside me.
Alice admitted.
But please, I really must know how to get back through the mirror.
Well, don't worry,
replied the owl.
Why shouldn't I worry?
Well, there's always another way back. And there's no point in going home until you're not so afraid of not growing up.
Now, wait a minute,
protested Alice.
I've done a great deal of growing up and growing down.
When you overcome the great fear in you, then and only then will you be able to stop the frightening appearances of the Jabberwocky and return to your family.
But how?
Only you know the answer to that,
explained the owl.
I don't know. If I knew, I would tell myself. And you don't care, or you'd tell me. You really would.
Oh, but I do care. And you will see that all the creatures in Looking Glass Land care.
And the owl reached out his wings and gently lifted Alice into the picture and out into the woods with him. Alice was puzzled as to why the creatures would care. The owl patiently explained.
Because when the fear in you creates the Jabberwocky, it is dangerous for all of us around here. It is really to our best interest if you cure these terrible afflictions by yourself. The best way to do it is to stay here and listen to me for a few years.
Years? I can't even stay here for another moment. My poor mother must be in a terrible state. Goodbye.
If you don't stay, you may never get home at all.
Warned the owl. Alice thought a moment, then decided.
Well, I suppose I could stay and listen to you for a while.
In that case, I'll be on my way.
Announced the owl.
But you wanted me to stay.
Protested Alice.
Ah, but now you're in Looking Glass Land, and everything here is backward. The reverse of everything you expected.
But we were just beginning to talk. Just beginning to...
Yes. Yes, my dear. But here, beginnings are endings.
And with that, the owl flew off and disappeared. Alone again, Alice decided, alas, truly everything was backwards in Looking Glass Land. Alice gave up, saying,
maybe this is the way home.
Alice walked into a beautiful garden filled with colorful flowers. Seeing a curious-looking tiger lily, she remarked,
only flowers could talk.
We can talk, if there's anybody worth talking to.
Exclaimed the tiger lily indignantly.
Excuse me?
Apologized Alice.
Can all the flowers talk?
As well as you can, and a great deal louder.
Next, a giant rose next to the tiger lily joined in the conversation.
It's just not good manners for us to speak first. But since you did before we did, I can tell you, when I first saw you, I thought, this little girl has a face with some sense in it, though not very much.
And the tiger lily quipped,
if only her petals curled up a little more, she might be all right.
Alice was upset by the flower's words.
If you don't speak to me more politely, I'll pick you.
Alice was starting to wish there were some other people in the garden. At that very moment, she thought she heard footsteps and quickly turned around. Alice was surprised to see a red queen, just like a queen in a chess set. But this one was full size. The queen came up to Alice and asked,
where did you come from?
I...
Look up, speak nicely, and stop twiddling your fingers all the time.
Scolded the queen.
I'm lost. I lost my way.
What do you mean, your way? All the ways around here belong to me. And curtsy while you're thinking of what to say. It saves time.
Alice obeyed, explaining,
I only wanted to see what the garden was like, Your Majesty. I thought I'd try and find my way to the top of this hill.
The Red Queen then led Alice to the top of the hill. Looking down, Alice exclaimed,
oh, the land. It's all marked out like a large chessboard.
Well, of course it is,
replied the Red Queen. Alice was amazed.
This is all one big game of chess? One big game that's being played all over the world? I can't believe it. There must be pieces moving everywhere. I wish I was one of them.
Oh, you're going to be,
said the Red Queen.
How wonderful! I wouldn't even mind being a pawn, but I'd rather be a queen.
But you're going to be a pawn. One of the White Queen's little brats is too young to play, so you'll have to take her place. You'll be a pawn, which will start you in the second square of the board, naturally.
Alice suddenly remembered what she really had to do.
I can't play. I really must be going home.
When you're a queen, you may go home.
But you said I was only going to be a pawn.
That's quite correct. But when you reach the 8th square of the chessboard, then you'll be a queen, and then you may go home. If you do make it to the 8th square, then we shall all be queens together, and it will all be feasting and fun.
And in a burst of thunder, the Red Queen was gone. Alice looked after her.
Oh, my. I will find my way home. Just know I will.
And she began walking down to the bottom of the hill. In this strange land, nothing really surprised Alice anymore. So when a train came barreling down the valley and slowed down, Alice jumped aboard. She entered a compartment with a very odd assortment of passengers. There was a well-dressed goat, a gentleman wearing clothes of white paper, and a large, educated-looking horse.
Show your ticket,
called the conductor as he entered the compartment.
Well, don't keep him waiting, child,
brayed the goat.
I'm afraid I haven't got one,
said Alice.
There wasn't a ticket office where I came from.
Alice believed the train was on the giant chessboard.
Where are you going, child?
To Square 4.
Alice was beginning to get an uneasy feeling. Surely this train had to go to Square 4. The gentleman joined in the attack on Alice.
Well, at least she's old enough to know where she's going, even if she doesn't know her own name.
I know my name.
Argued Alice. The goat told the others.
Should have known her way to the ticket office, even if she doesn't know the alphabet.
I know the alphabet. I really do.
Exclaimed Alice.
She'll have to go back from here as luggage.
Announced the horse.
No, I won't. I don't belong on this railway journey at all. I was in the forest just now and I wish I could get back there. What a bunch of grouchy people you all are.
The goat had another idea.
We should send her on by mail. She's got quite a stamp on her.
The horse disagreed.
No. We should send her as a message by telegraph.
The horse's words didn't bother Alice.
Oh, who cares? As long as it'll take me into the fourth square. I really think I should pull an emergency cord.
There isn't an emergency cord,
said the goat. When Alice heard the goat say that, she pulled on the goat's beard instead. As the goat screamed, the train came to a screeching halt, and Alice hopped off. Once she was on the ground, Alice heard a strange buzzing sound and a voice saying,
Hello? Hello? Hello?
It was a little gnat flying around her.
Hello. What do you want?
Alice asked. The gnat replied,
You look like a very nice person. A very, very nice person who wouldn't hurt me even if I am an insect.
I can see that. Exactly what kind of insect are you?
I'm a gnat. But what kind of insects do they like where you come from?
Well, I don't usually like insects where I come from.
The gnat wasn't at all insulted by Alice's remarks, and when she asked him directions to the 8th square, the gnat gladly showed her the way. Alice followed the gnat's directions and soon came upon 2 little fat men with their arms around each other's necks. They looked almost like 2 plump statues, but talking ones at that, or rather arguing, as they called each other Tweedledum and Tweedledee. Tweedledum startled Alice as she stared at them.
If you think we're waxworks, you really ought to pay, you know. Waxworks weren't made to be looked at for nothing.
I didn't know you were alive.
Apologized Alice.
Contrariwise, if you think we're alive, then you should speak.
Objected Tweedledee.
Oh, yes. I'm very sorry.
Then Tweedledum and Tweedledee began a terribly confusing discussion. Tweedledum said,
I know what you're thinking about. Well, it isn't so. No how.
Tweedledee disagreed.
Contrariwise, if it was so, it might be, and if it were so, it would be. But as it isn't, it ain't. That's logic.
Alice had had enough. As she continued on down the hill, Alice saw a giant egg rolling after her. She began to run, and the egg rolled up along a wall just beside her. Alice and the egg both stopped. Alice recognized the egg.
It's Humpty Dumpty. It can't be anyone else. And he looks exactly like a giant egg.
But Humpty Dumpty was insulted.
Young lady, it's not very nice to tell someone he looks like an egg.
And some eggs are very beautiful, you know.
Some people have no more sense than a baby.
Humpty commented.
My name's Alice, sir.
That's a stupid name.
I may be stupid, sir, but don't you think it'd be a lot safer down here on the ground? The wall is very narrow.
Of course I don't think so. Why, even if I did fall off, the king has promised
to send all of his horses and all of his men to put Humpty Dumpty back together again.
You've been snooping at doors, or you couldn't have known that.
Oh, no. It's in a book of very famous nursery rhymes. What a beautiful belt you've got.
Really? When a person doesn't know a cravat from a belt. It's a cravat, child, and a very beautiful one, I might add. It's a present from the White King and Queen.
Really?
Yes, really. They gave it to me for an unbirthday present just this past week.
An unbirthday present? What's an unbirthday present?
It's a present given when it isn't your birthday, of course.
I like birthday presents best.
You don't know what you're talking about. How many days are there in a year?
365.
And how many birthdays do you have?
1.
And if you take 1 from 365, that means you can get 364 unbirthday presents. You see, dum-dum?
Humpty Dumpty was very pleased at having won the argument, and he began to dance along the wall. Watching him, Alice grew worried.
Mr. Dumpty, if you're going to skip and dance, don't you really think it'd be a bit safer down here on the ground?
Actually, no. I thought that. I do that. You are a rather filthy little child, aren't you?
Mr. Dumpty, you don't understand. I suppose I do have a lot of fears inside me. And Mr. Ralph, at least I think that was his name. Mr. Dumpty, my fears are bringing back the Jabberwocky.
The Jabberwocky?
Cried Humpty Dumpty, and he immediately fell off the wall. Moments later, the White King's horses and all of his men arrived, hoping they could put Humpty back together again. The White King looked as though he belonged on a chessboard, just like the Red Queen did. He approached Alice and spoke.
Did you happen to see my 2 messengers as you came through the wood?
Well, Your Majesty.
Answered Alice.
Well, would you mind looking along this road here and tell me if you can see either of them?
Alice looked, then replied.
I see nobody on the road.
I only wish I had such eyes.
Said the White King with a sigh.
To be able to see nobody. It's as much as I can do to see real people by this light.
I see somebody now.
Cried Alice. It was a messenger, slowly approaching them. The White King asked him.
Who did you pass on the road? I'll whisper it.
Said the messenger. Then he began to scream.
They're at it again. Did you call that a whisper?
Asked the king.
Who's at it again?
Alice asked the messenger.
Well, the lion and the unicorn, of course. Let's run and see them.
The king grabbed Alice by the hand and rushed off into the forest. They ran until they came to a crowd watching the fight. What a ferocious fight it was. But within minutes, the fight stopped, and the unicorn said proudly,
I had the best of it this time.
The White King scolded him.
You shouldn't have run him through with your horn.
It didn't hurt him.
Protested the unicorn. Then, pointing his horn at Alice, he asked,
What is this?
A child.
Explained the White King.
We only found it today. It's as large as life and twice as natural.
A child? But I always thought that children were fabulous monsters. Is it alive?
Oh, yes. It can even talk.
This is incredible. Talk, child.
Demanded the unicorn.
Do you know I always thought unicorns were fabulous monsters, too? So I never saw one alive before.
Said Alice, almost not believing her eyes. And the unicorn answered,
Well, now that we have seen one another, if you'll believe in me, I'll believe in you. Is it a bargain?
Yes, if you like. That'd be rather pleasant.
Soon the lion joined the group. Looking straight at Alice, he asked,
Are you animal, vegetable, or mineral? You dum-dum!
Exclaimed the unicorn.
I've already told you she's a fabulous monster.
The lion didn't like being called a dum-dum, and he growled his displeasure. The unicorn then aimed his magnificent horn at the lion and said,
What a fight we might have for the crown now, sir! Oh, and I would surely win.
Snorted the lion.
Oh, I don't think so.
Replied the unicorn. And they squared off again and began to fight. Alice had had enough of fighting, and she wandered off into the forest. As she walked, Alice heard a tremendous pounding noise. Soon a gallant red knight, dressed in full armor, galloped towards her at full speed, brandishing his great club.
Ahoy! Ahoy!
Shouted the Red Knight, but as he came close to Alice, his horse reared up, and the knight fell to the ground with a crash. Alice was startled.
Check. You're my prisoner.
Announced the Red Knight. From the distance, another knight approached. This one was dressed all in white.
Check!
This white knight had come to Alice's rescue, but alas, he fell off his horse too,
She's my prisoner, you know.
warned the red knight.
Yes, but then I came and rescued her.
Protested the white knight. By now, Alice had to speak up.
I don't want to be anybody's prisoner. I just know I must become a queen if I'm ever to get home again.
The white knight gave her hope.
And you will. When you have crossed the next brook, you will definitely be a queen. I will see you safe to the end of the wood. Then I must go back, you know. Yes, that is the end of my move.
Thank you very much.
Said Alice, and she followed the white knight as he led her to the top of the hill. Once they reached the top, the white knight pointed out the way.
Now, you've only a few yards to go. Down the hill and over the brook. And then you will be a queen.
But I just know I'll be home. I just know it.
Exclaimed Alice happily. Full of excitement now, Alice ran down the hill and across the brook.
This must be the 8th square. I'm so happy to get here.
Magically, a crown appeared on her head.
What is this on my head? How in the world did this crown get on my head without me knowing it? Oh, but this is wonderful. I never expected to be a queen so soon.
And as every queen has her castle, so did Alice, just up ahead. It said right over the door, Queen Alice. The door had 2 bells. One said visitors, and the other said servants. Confused, Alice knocked on the door. Then Alice turned the handle of the door and it flew open. Inside Queen Alice's castle was a huge banquet with all the creatures from Looking-Glass Land and Wonderland sitting around a great table. There were 3 chairs at the head of the table. The White Queen was sitting with the Red Queen, and they asked Queen Alice to join them.
To Queen Alice's health!
Here! The crowd proclaimed. Alice stood up and spoke to everyone.
I thank you all. But please, everyone, show me how I go home. I don't want to be here anymore. All I want to do is to go home.
The Red Queen and the White Queen decided that this was certainly improper behavior for a queen. They decided to ask her a few questions to prove her worthiness.
It's obvious you never had any lessons in manners,
said the Red Queen. Alice sighed, then replied,
Manners aren't taught in lessons. Lessons teach addition, subtraction, and things of that sort.
Well, then, I have a lesson for you.
bellowed the White Queen. Alice stood quietly thinking. The White Queen was becoming impatient and asked,
Well, Alice, what's your answer?
I don't know.
exclaimed Alice.
I lost count.
Well, then, of course, you do know your ABCs,
said the Red Queen. Alice was insulted.
Sure I do,
she said. So do I,
said the White Queen.
Oh, we shall have such glorious times together, saying the alphabet over and over.
The Red Queen gave a wink to the White Queen. Surely they would get her with the next question.
How is bread made?
Asked the Red Queen.
I know that.
Alice replied.
First you take some flour.
Ah, but where do you pick the flour?
It isn't picked at all,
said Alice.
It's ground.
The Red Queen then retorted.
Oh, fan her. She's probably just feverish from all of this thinking.
Each queen had become bored with their folly. Alice was a rather smart child. However, they still wondered if she'd shown proper gratitude for her crown. Just then, a large box wrapped with a beautiful ribbon appeared in the middle of the room.
A present's come for you, dear,
the two queens told Alice.
For me?
Alice began opening the box when suddenly she saw eyes glowing in the dark, like burning coals. She saw jaws that were shooting fire. She saw enormous It was the Jabberwocky, and he was growing. The brave white knight approached Alice, calling,
I'm coming, Griffin! I'm coming! Have no fear! The White Knight is here!
Fearing for his life and her own, Alice cried out.
No! Go back, he'll kill you, he really will!
Then, calling to the owl, Alice pleaded,
Please help me, Mr. Owl. I don't know what to do. Don't let the monster hurt my friends.
You ask me? But it's you that must be brave.
the wise old owl told Alice.
I am brave, but not that brave.
And you will never grow up, will you, Alice? Until you conquer the fears inside you, you will never be more than a child.
Mustering up all her courage, Alice screamed at the Jabberwocky.
Go away! Go away! I'm not afraid of you! You're fake like the owl said! You're fake! I've grown up now! I don't believe in you! I don't believe in you! I don't believe in you!
The Jabberwocky began getting smaller and smaller and smaller until he was no bigger than a kitten. In fact, he was a kitten. It was just like the owl had said. When you've conquered your fears and you really do grow up, you're ready to go home.
Alice? Alice? There you are, Alice. I've been calling you for some time, dear. Where on earth have you been?
Alice's mother asked.
Oh, so many places, Mother. I have so much to tell you, but you really won't believe half of it. So I'll only tell you a few things. Like...
I'm sorry, dear. I'm afraid it's tea time now. But I'd love to hear all about it later.
Is it? Is it really?
Is it really what?
Tea time.
Yes, yes it is. And we're having strawberry shortcake. And your father bought gingerbread cookies. And Aunt Dorothy's insisted on opening one of her precious jars of raspberry preserves.
It sounds very lovely, Mother. But why were you calling me?
Oh, I almost forgot. I wanted to tell you that your father and I think you're finally quite grown up enough to join us. Would you like that, Alice? To join the grown-ups at tea?
Yes, Mother, I should like that very much. Thank you. Thank you. Truly have grown up, Mother, you'll see.